Casting. Okay. So we'll give people a moment to start coming in. We have our participants are all starting to come in. Welcome, welcome. I'm Heidi Graham. I am the president of the League of Women Voters. And hopefully who you see on screen now is our amazing ASL interpreter, Candace Whitlow, as well as our environmental issues group chair, Liz LaPlante. We'll be starting here in just a few minutes as everybody starts to roll in. Hopefully people were able to enjoy today. And I know that many people are eager to see our program, but also get to the debate. And we promise you that we have an amazing program for you tonight, but we're going to keep it tight as we can. So we had planned this long before we knew that the debates was scheduled for tonight. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn myself onto mute and hand this over to Liz LaPlante, my friend, my environmental mentor, and just an amazing woman. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. Hi, my name is Elizabeth LaPlante. I am the co-chair of this amazing League of Women Voters environmental group for Arlington Heights and Mount Prospect. As Heidi said, this is going to be a jam-packed session tonight with amazing speakers. This represents our second in a series of Anger to Action group. This tonight is going to focus on what we call climate justice. And we have many speakers who have expertise in this who will explain exactly what that is. So the agenda tonight, first, we're going to talk about what exactly is environmental justice. Then we're going to hear from these climate justice practitioners. The slide you should be seeing up there represents three of our keynote speakers. Dr. Seth Moore, who is an expert and has a specialty in moose, especially in Minnesota. Tanisha Harris, who is going to talk about the climate justice in Chicago and where she grew up and what she's been doing to fight climate injustice. And finally, Mary Catherine Hanafy LaPlante, who will be talking about her experiences with the Flint, Michigan water crises and what she's been doing to fight some of the other environmental injustices. So our agenda overall is for you to understand climate justice, hear from the practitioners, learn about actions to take, and most importantly, to vote. Next slide. So there's been many studies done, especially some recently. A big study just came out 2 days ago that said the most important thing to the youth, the single most important issue is to prioritize climate change. You want the youth to vote? Get them, start focusing on climate change. So that is the fourth and one of the most important objectives of tonight. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it back to Heidi to say any last words before I introduce our keynote speakers.
Thank you so much, Liz. So as many of you know, League began nearly 100 years ago. This is our 100th anniversary as part of the suffrage movement. And we've always been advocates for voting and voting rights. And even though we're nonpartisan party animals, you'll see we're not all MAOLs, middle-aged old ladies like me. We've got some really amazing young people here tonight. But almost since our inception, the League of Women Voters has been advocating for what we see as nonpartisan issues, and the environment was the first. So we've played a key role in this particular issue. So here's your Twitter quote for today. What tonight is going to do is we're going to turn slacktivists into activists. And I am so excited to bring this program to you. Our whole league is dedicated. We are all volunteers. And thank you so much to our great speakers for giving us their time tonight.
Thanks, Heidi. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the first of our keynote speakers. That would be Dr. Seth Moore. So Seth has been a practitioner in the environmental field, especially in the Great Lakes, for almost 30 years. He is a national climate change expert, the effect of climate injustice on indigenous people, resiliency and adaptation with regard to climate change. Dr. Moore is director of the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, Department of Biology and Environment. He has a Ph.D. in water resources from the University of Minnesota. He is nationally known for his work on moose and tick and climate change, the implications for the tribe. He's been featured on a PBS documentary, which is amazing. If you ever get a chance, you should Google it. It's just an amazing documentary, as well as on NBC, CNN, and he's been heard on various PBS shows nationwide. I've known Seth for many years. He is a leader in so much of what I learned about climate change and resilience and adaptation. He was ahead of the curve of most of us who work on this issue day in, day out. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Dr. Seth Moore.
Thanks, Liz. First question, is my audio audible?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I'm really happy to be here. As Liz said, my name is Seth Moore. I'm the Director of Biology and Environment for the Grand Portage Band of Chippewa. I want to take a second to just leave this title slide up, and I want you to look at the list of co-authors on the left. Because it was the League of Women Voters that invited me to give this presentation, I really wanted to represent the beautiful minds of some of my female colleagues in the work that I do. The people on this list are leaders in this field. They are combating social justice, they are combating environmental injustices, and they are combating climate injustices. And these people contributed greatly to this talk, as did many male colleagues, but I really wanted to represent these ones. And I've used bits and pieces from my interactions with them about this talk throughout. The Grand Portage Chippewa Reservation, the Grand Portage Band of Chippewa, is located on the northeastern corner of Minnesota, right on the shore of Lake Superior and on the border with Ontario. The Grand Portage Band reserves rights to hunt, fish, and gather in what's called the 1854 ceded territory. It's about 5 million acres of northeastern Minnesota and also includes Lake Superior as well. And the Grand Portage Reservation itself is almost entirely undeveloped. There are about 250 to 300 residences, and there are a few wilderness roads, but there's almost no development. It's a very remote environment. The Grand Portage Band has subsistence and commercial fisheries, and they practice those fisheries all the time. As I mentioned, the Grand Portage Reservation itself is primarily undeveloped wilderness. The Grand Portage Band harvests native fish from Lake Superior and from other water bodies. This species is lake trout and was one of the primary subsistence fish species used by the band. In addition to that, the Grand Portage tribal members also subsist on moose, which is a species that I spend a lot of my time and energy researching because their populations are in decline. Grand Portage also hosts a ruggedly handsome biologist, and we also try to restore native fish species into the Great Lakes. And we've been doing that for decades. And lastly, Grand Portage has healthy and self-sustaining populations of wolves. And we work with those wolves and other players in the ecosystem to understand how the ecosystem operates and to make sure that it's sustainable. And lastly, Grand Portage has youth that are exercising their subsistence rights, are learning how to be stewards of the environment, and these are the future of the reservation itself. The work that I do is really healthy, and it's because Ojibwa culture parallels ecosystem health. We use what's called 7th generation planning in the work that we do to protect the environment. This is the concept that each person is touched by 7 generations, from a great-grandparent to a great-grandchild. And the idea is that we leave the earth in a manner that we can subsist 7 generations from now the way that we're doing currently. It's based on this concept of a oneness of nature and humanity. And currently, tribal people represent those that can't speak for themselves, the plants, the animals, the environment itself. And the rights to hunt, fish, and gather that have been reserved by Indian tribes from the 1800s to present guarantee rights to non-toxic foods, water, and air. Tribal people are the only people in the United States that actually have a right to a clean environment because of the treaty rights that they reserved in signing the treaties with the US federal government. The work that I do is very similar to the Ojibwa worldview. It's this nexus of humans, animals, and the environment. There are some fundamental climatic and social justice issues in this country. These are issues on this slide that are not specific to Indian nations, but they certainly occur on Indian nations as well. Currently, the US lacks leadership on the climate and on general environmental health. We have rampant climate denial. We've had environmental deregulation in recent years. We have a population that's generally scientifically illiterate and even disrespectful of the practice of science. There are disparities in people taking what is called STEM career paths: science, technology, engineering, and math. There are economic disparities across the United States. Environmental health is not a community priority, and we see an amplification of social vulnerabilities as a consequence of our lack of leadership currently. As I mentioned a moment ago, Indian tribes in the United States reserved rights to hunt, fish, and gather in vast parts of the United States in exchange for allowing the United States federal government to use those pieces of land. What is happening now, as our air is degraded, as our water is degraded, and as our food has environmental contaminants found in it, is an environmental abrogation of treaty rights. The United States federal government is failing to meet the requirements of the treaties that they signed as sovereigns with the Indian tribes in the United States. There are climatic, social, and environmental justice issues in Indian country, and they're rampant. From a health perspective, asthma and wildfire frequencies. Wildfires are increasing in the United States. Think about the West Coast tribes, where most of the West Coast has been burning. Asthma is very prevalent in Indian communities. This COVID-19 pandemic, think about the Navajo Nation. It's been impacted terribly by this COVID pandemic. As an aside, I'll mention this. My children live half of their time across the border in Canada and half of their time in the United States in my house. Since this pandemic began in March, I haven't been able to see my children since the first week of March. This is because the Canadian border is closed because of how badly the United States is dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic. Is this the type of leadership that you as citizens want to see? Economic issues relative to sea level rise. If you look at that list of tribes, all of those tribes are losing their reservations as a consequence of storm surges from hurricanes and extreme weather, and as a consequence of sea level rise. Both of these are factors that are related to climate change. Many tribes across the United States are finding environmental toxins in their subsistence species. We see mercury in different species of fish and PCBs. We're seeing pharmaceuticals in the environment. We're seeing flame retardants that are in wildlife and in fish tissues. From a climatic perspective in Indian country, we're seeing loss of biodiversity. We're seeing diminishment of water resources for the southwestern tribes. We're seeing ocean acidification for some of the coastal tribes that's affecting their ability to subsist on the clam species and the fish species that they need. From an air quality perspective, like I mentioned a moment ago, we're seeing increased wildfire. There's uranium mining in the Southwest that causes air quality issues for some of the tribal members there. And from a development-related perspective, we're seeing extreme weather. We're seeing high frequency of hurricanes, tornadoes, and extreme rainfall events that are flooding reservations in Indian lands. Climate justice is really affecting Indian tribes, as is social justice issues. And the impacts of a warming climate aren't felt equitably among people. And some of the victims, most of the victims of climate change have a disproportionately low responsibility for causing it. The young man in this image recently took his life. He grew up on the reservation and suffered some of the social injustices that we are seeing rampant in society now. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has stated explicitly that indigenous people in North America are disproportionately vulnerable to climate change. This is because Indian reservation land bases are fixed. So as species assemblages shift on those lands, the Indian tribes themselves are not able to move. If a reservation is flooded by sea level rise, that reservation is gone. Almost all the tribes in the United States fit into these categories of environmental and social justice and climatic justice issues. Toxic facilities generally are found in areas where there's, I'm sorry, I can't see my screen well. In communities of color and in communities where they are not affluent and not good income streams. Race is the number one indicator for the placement of toxic facilities in this country, and communities of color and low income communities are often the hardest hit by climate change. I'm going to focus a little bit on some of the work that we're doing in Grand Portage. I talked a little bit about broader social, climatic, and environmental justice issues. I talked about tribal issues, and now I'm going to talk specifically about issues that are going on in the Grand Portage Indian Reservation. We've seen a decline in brook trout, which is a climate justice issue as water temperatures get too hot from warm summers. We're seeing moose population decline, again, a climate justice issue. Here's a quote from one of our tribal members. Moose are increasingly scarce because of the warmer temperatures in our region. We have some issues with wild rice. The extreme weather knocks the rice off the stalks before it can be harvested. And we have contaminants in fish, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But tribal members have to monitor how much fish they consume so that they aren't taking in too much mercury to affect unborn children. And we have educational disparities, which is a social justice issue. There's rampant global evidence of climate change. This particular graph shows temperature trends from during the 1900s, and they've increased significantly. I'm going to tell a story about climate change adaptation in Speckled Trout Lake. Historically, this was a brook trout lake, and populations declined from about 2002 to present because the increased water temperatures in the lake exceeded the limit that killed brook trout. And if you look at this graph here, the top red squares and the red line indicates the lethal thermal limit for brook trout, which is about 25 degrees Celsius, which you'll see on the axis on the right. Beginning in about 2004, the water temperatures every single year exceeded that lethal thermal limit. The blue line indicates the brook trout population trend graph over time. And you can see the brook trout population declining over time as water surface temperatures increased. By 2007, there were no longer any brook trout in the lake whatsoever. We were forced to make a decision. What we concluded was about 50% of the lake volume was over the lethal limit for brook trout. They couldn't survive in the lake. So we shifted to a cool water fishery. We stocked yellow perch in 2004. We stocked walleye in 2006. The lake has subsequently become self-sustaining in yellow perch, and we have adult walleye populations as well. We had to shift our fish assemblage as a consequence of climate change. This is a climate adaptation strategy that we employed. Our future projections indicate that Trout Lake should be sustainable for both walleye and yellow perch for the foreseeable future. I'll talk a little bit about moose. Moose populations are declining as a consequence of climate change, wildfire frequency, and loss of habitat. And if you look at this trend line, it indicates the moose population trend in Grand Portage from 1990s to about 2015, and it's a declining trend. And what we concluded was that warm winters are leading to increased deer numbers on the reservation. Deer pass a parasite to moose called brainworm that kills moose. In addition, the high deer populations led to higher wolf populations on the reservation. The wolves were preying on moose calves to the point that we didn't have any young calves surviving into adulthood. In addition to that, moose were suffering consequences of another parasite called the winter tick. In years when the snow melts early, winter tick populations explode, and they cause hair loss on moose to the point that they become anemic and die. every year now we have an early snowmelt. So climate change is the overall factor that's really impacting the moose population. And if you look at some data from Grand Portage specifically, our average August maximum temperature has increased by about 3 degrees Celsius in the last 35 years. And in addition to that, our average daily snow depth has decreased by about 70%. These are clear impacts of climate change on the reservation itself. And if you look at how our adult moose are dying, brainworm, which is passed from deer, is about 1/3 of our deaths. Ticks are about another 20% of our deaths. Unknown health issues, also related to climate change because moose are stressed from the heat. So moose health issues are affecting about 80% of the total mortality on adult moose. I'm going to switch to contaminants in the environment. These two graphs here show pharmaceuticals that were found in fish that are used for subsistence by Grand Portage tribal members. The two species that we looked at in Lake Superior were Lake Cisco and lake trout. And you can see there are a suite of pharmaceuticals that are found in these fish tissues. And that's because pharmaceuticals are very resilient in the environment and they perpetuate and end up in fish, they end up in the water, and they end up in the sediments. The classes of pharmaceuticals that we found in fish, waters, and sediments are shown on the graph to the right. Primarily what we're seeing in the environment are hormones, which affect fish reproductive behavior and their ability to reproduce. We see antidepressants, which can affect fish's behaviors. We see antibiotics, which may affect the natural bacterial communities in lakes. We see DEET and we see blood pressure medications. If you look at this graph, this is a state of human society as seen in the environment. This graph here shows mercury levels in Grand Portage fish. As a result of mercury in fish, which affects women of childbearing age and infants, we had to make recommendations that tribal members eat less fish of certain species. So we suggest for tribal members to eat Lake Superior herring, which is relatively low in mercury, and a few other species, but we have tribal members avoid large lake trout, yellow perch, large pike, large walleye. These are all subsistence species that were historically consumed by the tribal members. We have educational disparities in Indian country. We have a small percentage of tribal youth that are taking science, technology, engineering, and math career directions. We have a scarcity of qualified tribal members in natural resources and environmental science, even though there are plenty of jobs for them. And tribal students, because of where reservations are located, which are typically very remote areas, tribal students have little exposure to post-secondary academic systems, which typically occur in metropolitan areas. So there's a disjunct between where tribal students are growing up and where they can actually get post-secondary education. I think that may change now with more online education capabilities available. Indigenous women are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change for a variety of reasons. Land rights and ownership, patriarchy, discrimination against women. So this is a huge issue. Climate justice is a huge issue for Indigenous communities and for any communities of color in the United States. There are some solutions. We need better climate adaptation planning. We need to protect the sanctity of water and wildlife. We need to reduce environmental toxins. We need to adequately fund disaster response and mitigation and climate adaptation. And we should really be incorporating the Indigenous knowledge of land management and seventh generation planning in everything that we do. Here's what you can do. You can pursue science, technology, engineering, and math career paths. You can develop and perpetuate science literacy. Help people understand science, help people understand that it's legitimate and that it's important. You can teach and communicate, but most importantly today, you can vote. I asked all of the colleagues who are co-authors on this presentation, what would you do if you were queen of the world? And I'm not going to read these, I'm just going to leave this as my closing slide. I think these are some great and insightful comments from some of the brightest and most beautiful minds that I know. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. That was Absolutely brilliant as usual. And Seth's link and some of the documentaries and links to his articles, we're going to post on the League of Women Voters website that Heidi can talk about at the end. But thank you so much, Seth. And again, I want to reinforce Seth is being very modest, but he actually is one of the leading practitioners of climate change resilience and adaptation. And he was one of the first people I knew, at least in the Great Lakes Basin, to connect all the dots in the ecosystem and to figure out how everything was happening because of climate change, and then quickly try to pivot so that he could save some of the food stock and to switch to other ways to eat. We're going to have time for questions at the end. So please save your questions for Seth till that time. But thank you again, Seth. I'm disappointed that the bear cub is not Zoom bombing tonight. It Zoom bombed yesterday during our dry run, but can't have everything. But thank you, Seth.
Good thing. Thanks, Liz.
So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to introduce one of our emerging young leaders. Lucy Nisi is emerging leader with the League of Women Voters. She is a sophomore at Prospect High School, and she's on the youth board member of the League of Women Voters. And very impressively, she was just appointed to the Village of Arlington Heights Environmental Commission. So you have to call her Commish. And so she she's also working on a sustainability plan for the Village of Arlington Heights that will help lead her for the Girl Scout Gold Medal. I've known Lucy for a long time. She's one of the most brilliant young minds that Seth was talking about that we have to cultivate. So I'm going to turn it over to Lucy to introduce our next youth speakers now.
Hi, thank you so much for the kind introduction. My name is Lucy Nisi, and I'm going to be introducing our second speaker for tonight, Tanisha Harris of Chicago. Tanisha has served as the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition Administrator for the Illinois Environmental Council since September 2019, where she oversees coordination for the Climate Table and Steering Committee, engages with youth-led organizations, and assists with energy policy. She believes that environmental justice should be the center of all environmental work, and constant communication is key to building a well-functioning coalition. She graduated from Loyola University. Tanisha, take it away.
Thank you, Lucy, for that introduction. I'm very happy to be here. As I already said, I work for the Illinois Environmental Council. I'm actually the Clean Energy Programs Director now. Short year, big things have happened. And I'm also a youth climate and environmental justice activist. I started this in high school, transitioning into college, and Seth's presentation really got me thinking, like my degree, I have a BS in environmental science. I really like the STEM field and the science background. He had me remembering what it was like doing research on Lake Erie and phosphorus floats in Michigan. But I'm hearing more talk about the sociology aspect of the climate crisis, and pretty much specifically environmental racism in Southeast Chicago, which is where I grew up. Next slide, please. So first, I want to give you a little snapshot of my organization, the Illinois Environmental Council. We are the eyes, ears, and voice of the environmental community in Springfield since 1975. I like to say we're your one-stop shop for all your legislative needs, but next slide, please. We actually describe ourselves as a trade association, and we represent environmental organizations in front of the General Assembly. We have 100 affiliate organizations from all across Illinois. Our issues range from international to the hyperlocal level. We will help with anything, passing bills, killing bills, writing bills, and our areas of interest include energy, water, land use, agriculture, and wildlife. So we want to ensure a healthful environment for all of Illinois, and that is harder to do in some communities than other, and that's what we're going to talk about. Next slide, please. So what is environmental racism? What is environmental injustice? And what is environmental justice? I usually would define that to people once we reach this slide, what does it mean? But I'm hoping that by sharing my experience growing up on the south side of Chicago, that I will illustrate the definition to you. And by the time we reach the end of my presentation, you will have an understanding of what environmental racism is without me having to prompt you to the words. And I encourage people to take in this graphic in front of you, looking at the oppression of this brown community about to get hit by a tidal wave that's polluted and it's very close to their house, and just like what kind of feelings does that invoke in you? What do you think when you look at this graphic, and what does that have to do with environmental racism? Next slide, please. And so I am from South Shore. On the graph, it's this red area that you see highlighted, and it is a predominantly Black community, and it's predominantly low income. I come from a low income family on the South side, and I spent 18 of my 23 years there. That experience is drastically different than, say, the north side of Chicago, which is where I live now, but that is my home, and that's where I developed my relationship to nature and my love and appreciation of the planet, and it led me to environmental science. But I realized that my journey to nature was very different than, say, my peers in high school and some of the other experiences people had. And please keep in mind the demographics of my community, because I'm going to use that to compare that experience. Next slide, please. So when I was in high school and in college, I had the opportunity to make a wonderful video with Alliance for Climate Education. They do great work with mobilizing young people and getting them out to vote and be activists. And so this is a video that was created while I was a senior in college about air pollution in my community. Go ahead and play.
You never had to consciously think about breathing before the asthma attack, and now you're having one, and you're trying to remember how to breathe. Your chest is constricting, you can't get enough air. It's terrifying because you don't want to be that person that died from an asthma attack. I'm from South Shore. It's a neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, and South Shore is primarily people of color. It's primarily a Black community. Oftentimes you'll have like highways, which are really big sources of pollutants and contributors to air pollution in Black and brown neighborhoods. There's a lot of coal-fired power plants on the south side, and there's a lot of industries on the south side, which not only is harming air quality, it's harming soil pollution as well. And so there's contaminated soils over there, there's contaminated air. A lot of children have asthma or other types of lung diseases because of the air they're breathing. Climate change disproportionately affects low-income and marginalized communities, such as communities of color. But the resources to mitigate those effects are not funneled into those communities. Imagine having to deal with contaminated soil where your kids can't go outside and play, and contaminated air, which you just can't avoid, and not having the resources to deal with that. And so you just continuously getting sick. It upsets me. Sometimes I feel like there's very little I can do about it. A lot of the work I do on campus is about environmental injustice, and it's upsetting because it's not as unintentional as people think. And when you're talking about solutions to environmental problems, why is it that often these voices are left out of the conversation? Why aren't there more Black and brown faces and people from the low-income communities or people living next to a coal fire plant in the conversations about solutions to climate change? Where are they? I would tell Illinois lawmakers to make sure that they're listening and including the communities that they're going to while switching to clean energy. I don't understand why we have to fight for clean air and clean water. We need clean air to live. It's time to take action, and we need to do something about it. One of the best ways to start is by voting. We are the next generation. We're going to be the future politicians and scientists and activists. And so it's important for young people to go out and vote so they have their voices heard and they make a statement like, this is what I believe in, this is what I'm fighting for, and I'm not going to support someone who is against that.
So I always cringe when I share this video, but it's a very good storytelling device, and I think it gets the message across while having illustrations of what my community looks like. So a lot of that footage is from the south side of Chicago, also referred to as East Chicago, and it's drastically different than what you would see on, say, the north side of Chicago. And we have a very good train system, and I like to say if you rode the train from one end to the other, you would very quickly see the difference in socioeconomic status and demographics just from that train ride, which is something that I've done, having moved from the South Shore to now the North Side near my university. And in that video, I have asthma, my family has asthma, my friends have asthma. Growing up on the South Side, it would be unusual to find someone without asthma or those types of problems because it's so commonplace in my community, and that has a lot to do with the industries that get placed there. Next slide. And so South Shore has seen its countless ends of battles. In terms of against environmental racism, it's predominantly Black, it's low income, uh, we had less resources, less access to power, less decision making opportunities because because of white supremacy and racism, where our community is hit the hardest and we have the less resiliency and the least amount of resources to combat it. And also we're largely ignored or overlooked. And this isn't just unique to South Shore. This is unique to BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, BIPOC individuals, low income. They're not heard. And I carry both of those identities coming from a low income Black household. And so some of the ways we've fought environmental racism was one, their pet coke, which was a very big win for the environmental justice organizations that fought it. It is a byproduct of the coal refinery process. And for years, it was left in mounds on the site where they would store it, but that site was just within walking distance from people's homes. And when the wind would blow, that black particles would just coat people's homes. Children would play in the mounds, and it led to, as you could probably guess, it was particulate matter. It led to respiratory illnesses. Some people developed cancer, and it took years of activists and organizers in that community who still have to deal with the adverse health effects and have to juggle, taking care of their families, taking care of themselves to fight this extremely strong corporation. And this successfully got it banned in 2016, only for another issue to move in. So we're currently battling General Irons. It is a shredding facility. It's moving from Lincoln Park, which is an affluent neighborhood. They have kicked out General Irons because of their pollution, and the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency okayed them moving to the south side, which is like, wow, we just won this battle only 4 years ago, and now you're putting another source of pollution in our community. And let's not forget the water issue with East Chicago suffering from lead in drinking water. It was on track to become the next Flint, Michigan, which one of the panelists will talk about later. So we have air pollution, soil pollution, and contaminated drinking water. It's a lot of things to deal with. And I really love this picture in the bottom right where it says this will not happen in the Gold Coast. The Gold Coast is a very affluent neighborhood in the downtown or Loop area. They would not deal with this problem. They have the money, they have the right skin color. This is not a problem you would hear about in the Gold Coast or most of the North Side because of that. And then there's other things we have to deal with: lack of green space, living in a food desert, and a transit desert. So food desert, it's where you don't have access to local fresh produce. I remember as a kid walking for an hour to a grocery store with my mom and then walking back hauling groceries unless we had the money to pay for 2 buses there and then 2 buses back. It wasn't easy to get fresh produce, but there was a McDonald's on every corner. And then a transit desert. Again, I like to use the train reference. If you were to ride the train from the north side of Chicago to the south side of Chicago, you would find that for the train stops on the north side, you can walk very comfortably between the 2 stops, or 3 or 4. But once that train gets past the loop headed south, the distance between the stops are very long and you have to rely on the bus. And also there's a lot of sources of pollution. So they like to build highways nearby, or hubs for trucking, and just there's a lot of pollution from vehicle exhausts on the south sides of Chicago. Next slide, please. So I intentionally didn't talk about the lack of green space because I wanted to share this quote from my 6-year-old brother. He came to visit me at my apartment on the north side, first time up here, and he asked, why are there so many leaves? And I just want you to, I want that to resonate with you because it really hit me and my heart. These are pictures of just like rain gardens or gardens I see walking through my neighborhood. As soon as I leave my door on the north side, I see lush green vegetation. But from where we grew up on the south side and where he is now, that's not there. I did have a tree in my yard that I grew up playing around, and I did develop my appreciation for nature from the south side, but there is a lack of green space. You would not see such vibrant colors, such lush plants or vegetation on the south and west sides of Chicago as well. And my 6-year-old brother realized that, and he thought it was, again, that's not something that's common. Like, oh, people have plants around? Why is there so many plants here? What's going on? It is very hard to access green space. One, Illinois has Illinois has parks. I haven't visited any of them. One, you have to have the time, access, and resources to drive to a state park. But then two, sundown towns are still active in Illinois. They're in the southern and central parts of Illinois, and that's where a lot of the parks are. There's a lot of racism and danger experience going into green space because of racial profiling. Brown BIPOC faces aren't usually welcomed in these areas. And so if you overcome the access barrier, you still have to deal with the danger present in being in them, which hurts me because I love field work. And it can be scary to do sometimes because I'm always worried someone gonna think I'm a criminal and hurt me. Next slide, please. So I'm talking about the things I experienced with environmental racism, and the big question is like, well, what do you do about it? This is such a pervasive issue. It's been around for centuries. You know, white supremacy is a very strong and powerful structure, and like I said in the video, sometimes I feel like my hands are tied. Like, what can I do to stop the systemic issue that has existed long before I was here and possibly later on? And so with IEC is a part of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, and one of the things we're tackling is the pollution issue from fossil fuel industries, and that's with the Clean Energy Jobs Act. Next slide, please. So the Clean Energy Jobs Act is a bill we're trying to get past this veto session, and fingers crossed for that. But it has 4 basic pillars with equity at the center of it all. So quality jobs and investments in communities across the state, 100% renewable energy by 2050 is extremely important, but carbon-free electric sector by 2030. It's pertinent that we decarb and go carbon neutral by 2030, and this would mandate the closure of all fossil fuel plants in Illinois by 2030 so we can meet the IPCC goal. And then removing the equivalent of 1 million diesel vehicles from the road, as transportation is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases in Illinois right now. And so right now, the support that we have in the League of Women Voters is one of our supporters. But in terms of legislators that are on board, we have 33 Senate sponsors and 59 House co-sponsors. But since we're entering veto session, we need 71 House sponsors and 36 Senate sponsors to reach a supermajority for this bill to pass. Next slide, please. And so there's a big urgency to get CEJA, Clean Energy Jobs Act, passed. It's really good for consumers. It's going to lower electricity bills and protect ratepayers by making and propping up the renewable industry, making it more accessible and competitive on a market that, and we all know Trump is still trying to say coal is coming back. It's not. The jobs and economy, it's really important that as we transition to a clean energy economy that we make sure no community is left behind. And whether that is a coal community who relies on the property taxes paid by their local coal plant, or my community who didn't benefit from industries being nearby and just suffer from the pollution, it's important that they close and that there's a transition plan in place for everyone. And that a part of that is jobs, but there's also wealth building opportunities focused in BIPOC communities, environmental justice communities, and coal communities. So we can invest in traditionally disenfranchised communities. And then the public health and environmental message: we are in a climate crisis, and for my generation, it's the largest existential crisis. I like to say I have 9 years of my best life. I don't know if I'm joking. It's a very serious thing, and there's a lot of climate anxiety experienced by young people right now who don't know if there's going to be a livable planet in the next 10 or so years. And as I already explained, there's a lot of adverse health effects from the pollution, specifically from like fossil fuel or just other industries, and it's important that they close to help protect the public, but also in the environment, because we know we need to go carbon neutral to stop the climate crisis. So it'd be great if you guys, hopefully that has helped lead you to what environmental racism is and what environmental justice is. You might have heard that climate racial justice is climate justice, so you can't do one without the other. These are very intertwined issues. It's very intersectional, and so if you really want to solve the climate crisis, we also have to solve racism in the world right now, and you can't do one without another because you're leaving BIPOC communities behind. And with that, that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanisha. That was an excellent presentation. I'm really excited to introduce one of my good friends, our third speaker, Mary Catherine Hannafy-LaPlante. She is a high school senior at Prospect High School in Mount Prospect. She founded Speak Up, Green Up, a nonprofit organization that works to eliminate pesticides and herbicides from the northwest suburbs, especially on park and school district land. She's the co-finance director of the Illinois Youth Climate Movement and serves on the board of directors for She Votes Illinois. She entered for the US EPA last summer, focusing on the lead drinking water issue in Flint, Michigan. MC, take it away.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Just to check, can you guys see the slides?
Yep.
Awesome. So, hi, my name is Mary Catherine Hannafy-LaPlante. I am a senior at Prospect High School, and today I'm going to talk about the Flint, Michigan crisis and how I have made a difference in the climate justice movement as a teenager living in the suburbs of Chicago. So I'm sure that all of you have heard about the lead pipe crisis in Flint, Michigan, as it was one of the first climate justice incidences that broke into the national news cycle. So Flint, Michigan is a majority African-American town of 100,000 people, 45% of whom live under the poverty line. In 2013, Flint fell under state control due to its $25 million deficit. And in an effort to save money, the government switched its drinking water supply from Detroit's treated water system to the highly corrosive, pollution-filled Flint River. And for reference, the Flint River has caught on fire not once, but twice in recorded history. The water quality of the river was further impacted, if that's even possible, by the set of lead pipes that were being used to bring the water into the city. These pipes were extremely old, and the lead leached into the water at alarming rates. Complaints began to build up. The water was foul-smelling, discolored, and bad-tasting. It was causing skin rashes, hair loss, and itchy skin. The town was being poisoned. Despite these complaints, state officials maintained that the water was safe. In September of 2015, Flint pediatrician Mona Hanna-Attisha found that nearly 9,000 children were supplied lead-contaminated water for 18 months. Mona organized a petition signed by the majority of Flint residents for the US EPA to launch an immediate investigation into the Flint water crisis. The EPA failed to act. So when I first heard about this case, I was immediately intrigued, right? How could the US EPA, whose sole job is to protect citizens from environmental disasters, stay complacent while an entire town is poisoned? Then I learned about Miguel del Toro, the EPA whistleblower who helped expose Flint's lead problem. So after drafting an interim report detailing the dangerous lead levels, Miguel's supervisors told him to bury his findings. Miguel released them anyways and was only allowed to keep his job after he received media attention for the report. His supervisors have since resigned. Now, according to the Michigan Civil Rights Commission, a state-established body, the poor governmental response to the Flint crisis was a result of systematic racism. After all, it isn't hard to imagine how different the government's response might have been if the lead pipe crisis had occurred in, say, Wilmette, one of the richest suburbs of Chicago. Like Tonisha said, if it had happened on the Gold Coast, it probably wouldn't have happened. In fact, if the government had only been willing to spend a little bit of money to put phosphate, a chemical shown to stop lead from leaching into the water, the entire disaster may have been avoided. If the constituents had been wealthier, I have no doubts that the government would have purchased phosphate for the drinking water, thus protecting the lives of thousands of people. So I had the opportunity to intern at the EPA in the summer of 2019. And after hearing about the Flint, Michigan case, I knew that I wanted to work in the same office as Miguel del Toro. So there I was at 16, working at a desk in the groundwater and drinking water branch at the US EPA Region 5 offices in downtown Chicago. And my desk was 15 feet away from Miguel's. So from all of my research, I expected the EPA employees to be heartless, racist people who didn't care about their constituents, right? After all, from an outsider's perspective, it would seem as though employees of the EPA had done everything in their power to minimize the Flint disaster. However, my expectations could not have been more wrong. The people that I worked with were some of the kindest, most empathetic people that I had ever met. They were hardworking, ethical, and extremely well educated. As I witnessed their passion and dedication to their work, I thought to myself, what went wrong in the Flint, Michigan case? The answer, at least from my perspective, the answer is bureaucracy. It doesn't matter how amazing the employees are if they only work through the system. The system isn't broken. It just was never intended to serve minorities, the disenfranchised, or the low income. The only way to fix the system is to break it, just as Miguel did. I remember having an extremely poignant conversation with Miguel in the final week of my internship. I asked if he had any advice for me to use in my future endeavors, and he said very simply, do your job, even if the people who gave you that job don't want you to do it correctly. It only took one enterprising person to save the lives of thousands of people. Miguel inspired me to break the system, which is why I started Speak Up Green Up, a 501c4 organization that works to eliminate pesticides and herbicides from communities across Chicago. Currently, I'm working with High School District 214 and the Mount Prospect Park District to implement sample plots, testing out a natural pesticide alternative. Unsurprisingly, low-income communities and communities of color suffer the greatest risks and impacts of pesticide use. Pesticides can cause cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and birth defects. Farmers are exposed to exorbitant amounts of pesticides, and public housing is routinely sprayed with pesticides as well. The goal of my organization is to ensure that, regardless of income level or race, all people have access to safe recreational spaces in their communities. As the co-finance director of the Illinois Youth Climate Movement, the largest youth-led environmental organization in Illinois, I specifically select speakers for rallies who have been personally affected by environmental racism so that their poignant stories can receive news coverage. So what can you do? After this webinar, please send a letter to the school and park district of your choice to express your concern with the spraying of pesticides on public property. The official Speak Up Green Up sample letter can be found at leagueofwomenvoters.org, which is LWV-AH.org. All you need to do is fill in the specific park or school district information and send it to the emails provided. Thank you so much for listening to me today, and I hope that you learned something new.
Thanks, MC. That was a great presentation. Briefly, I'm going to go over some of the actions I've been doing on the local level as another youth activist. So Reagan, if you wouldn't mind. Okay, thank you so much. Awesome. Would you mind going back one slide? Awesome, thank you so much. So as a member of the Environmental Commission, I'm the youth member. I am looking forward to what I'm going to be able to do in the commission. I am a new member. I was sworn in 2 weeks ago, so I'm just sort of getting the hang of it, and I'm really excited to be moving into action in the next month or so. The commission is, I am an appointed member, and its job within the village is to provide a place where commission members can do research to create information about what the village can do to increase its green stance moving forward. My goal right now as an individual on the commission is to bring the sustainability and climate justice conversation to the forefront of Arlington Heights' public interest. I want to create a working long-term sustainability plan that connects the school district, the park districts, public work centers, and other community organizations so that as a local community, we can have a goal and a plan for sustainability moving into the near future. As a member of the League of Women Voters, I'm an emerging leader, which is their group of youth members in high school and in college. I'm on the league board as the representative for that population. So a lot of my interest is directed in how the youth are responding to issues, including climate change and other social justice issues, and how we as members and as volunteers can create our own impact. I'm currently working through the league to create initiatives that will strengthen our already pretty strong relationships with the local school districts, including District 214, which MC is working with, and to work on local projects for issues such as climate change that our group is interested in. In the future, I see us doing a lot of volunteer work to help with local climate initiatives and to move forward with incorporating climate curriculum in schools and in school extracurriculars. That is one of our priorities. And lastly, I'm currently beginning my Girl Scout Gold Award, which is a long-term sustainable service project that I do through the Girl Scouts. And my focus will be on local sustainability within Arlington Heights to implement projects along with my work in the commission to lead us for a more sustainable future. So briefly, I just want to go over, if you could move to the next slide, Reagan. Thank you. Some of my points of interest in my sustainability projects and what I see as important pillars to local sustainability, which takes on a slightly different form than larger scale or national interest. In my local community, I see the most important goals as creating a concrete goal for emissions, setting ourselves up with a timeline for when we want to become sustainable, and coming to a consensus among public organizations and residents as to how we are going to move forward to a greener future. Secondly, I think that infrastructure is a really important facet of this discussion. Planning infrastructure changes or projects, including transportation, green energy, park spaces, and equipment. These all need to be done in a way that complements the unique layout of the village in question, in my case, Arlington Heights, and leads forward a solution that will work with what you already have. And then lastly, building community resources. To me, that means we need to think more about how we're managing waste, how we're implementing climate education on many levels of the community, how we're using clean products, and especially in a village like mine, how we are focusing our efforts on business interaction and making that a priority. And I think most importantly, increasing our community involvement and dedication to making a change for the better in terms of climate justice. Thank you so much. If you have any questions or ideas, I would love to hear from you, especially moving forward in my role on the commission. So please reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you, Tanisha, and thank you, Mary Catherine. I am so inspired by you young three women. You are amazing. So our last speaker of the night is Dr. Regina Gomez. Dr. Gomez is a physician at Northwest Community Hospital. She was trained through Al Gore's Climate Reality Leadership Corporation. She served as the League of Women Voters environmental chairwoman before I did. So I am turning it over to you, Dr. Gomez.
Thank you so much, Liz. Yes, Regina Gomez. And my personal journey started in 2017. I know that each of us here is on our own personal journey, and we have a varied audience, I am sure. But as League likes to do, we want to leave you with some action items and kind of pull everything together for the evening. These next 2 slides, I'm just going to take about 4 or 5 minutes of your time, are meant to be a resource. So if you want to take a snapshot of this with your phone, go ahead. But otherwise, it will be available on our website. So let's just go ahead and start. After hearing these amazing speakers, I think we should all be moved. I'm moved to do more and do my part. So one of the most effective individual actions that you can take is to move to a plant-rich diet. And I would challenge each one of you, and you probably are doing better than you think, is to have a meatless day of meals. So basically, the less things are processed in all senses of that word, the less its carbon footprint, and in general, the healthier this is going to be for you. The second thing that you can do is focus on reduced food waste. So eat the leftovers. Now, we have to keep in mind that greenhouse gases are produced at multiple steps through food production process. But we can do our part by not buying what we don't need and using what we have, and we can really make an impact. Touching on the many points that were brought up by our speakers, go through your house, look at the cleaning products that you have, and we're going to ask you this fall to skip putting toxic pesticides on your lawn. Liz LaPlante has been with the EPA for decades, and she has given us 2 resources here. These are quality resources on the slide for you to get quality information to guide you. And then the last thing with the leaves falling, don't use the gas-powered leaf blower, use a rake. That gas-powered leaf blower actually puts as much pollution into the air as a large vehicle, not to mention the noise pollution and its disruption to our natural environment. Now, there are things that you need the help of others. The cleanest energy is the energy that you don't use. So we're going to ask you to call ComEd and NICOR and get your free home energy assessment. A number of us in the league have had a positive experience with this, very professional, it's very worthwhile. And then for those of you living in Arlington Heights, we do want to bring to your attention that the electric aggregation supplier contract will be ending November 2020. There is no indication that there should be a problem with the renewability of that contract. However, if they don't renew, you won't be getting those renewable energy certificates. Next slide, please. If you are in the market for a vehicle, we want you to consider hybrid or electric. And if you're not, go ahead and plan your car trips more efficiently. So our largest contribution to greenhouse gases is our home and our transportation. Next on the slide, you see the contact information so that you can contact your park and school district to stop using toxic pesticides. And then as far as your own property, plant a tree. This is the season to plant a tree. Plant a rain garden, help our watershed issues, and plant a pollinator pocket. You can get that garden bed ready and start supporting our wildlife. And then last, we want to look beyond ourselves. We want to amplify all of our actions. One more plug, please call or write your legislator to pass the Clean Energy Jobs Act. And of course, not least, please support an organization that is focused on quality education and healthcare, or specifically empowers women who are disproportionately affected. And the last slide, save the date. Tuesday, October 27th is our webinar where we will talk more about these actions, if any of those intrigued you, and we want to continue with you on your journey. So thank you.
Thanks, Regina. And thank you to all the amazing speakers tonight. I hope that you were inspired and by what you heard, and that you could perhaps take action. I'm going to turn this over just for a couple Q's and A's to Heidi and Lucy, and then we will end and go on your way. We also are very open if folks want to hear a particular topic with the environment. One of the topics we thought might be interesting would be the actual effects of climate change where you live. We have a lot of climate change experts in the Chicago area, so that might be of interest to you, and how you can protect your family and help adapt to the changing climate. So over to you, Heidi and Lucy.
Thank you. We're going to move on to a brief Q&A session. If you have any questions that you've been waiting to ask for the remainder of the speakers, if you could throw them into the Q&A or the chat if you're having issues with the Q&A. And we will take them from here. So we are going to start by reviewing one question that has already been answered in chat, but we thought it would be helpful to have that answered out loud. Dr. Moore, if you could answer the question, what can we do about pharmaceuticals? How are they getting into the water that far north from before? That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And the answers, there are two answers to that question. You know, the first thing that people can do in terms of preventing pharmaceuticals in the environment, honestly, is to take fewer pharmaceuticals. And when pharmaceuticals are required, don't flush the excess ones down the toilet. And that's because wastewater treatment systems are not designed to treat pharmaceuticals, which are resilient in biological systems. The second thing that people can do is really advocate for wastewater reuse and wastewater recycling, and in particular in hospital settings, clinic settings, and elderly facilities. And that's because about 80% of pharmaceuticals that are consumed in a hospital are excreted in a hospital as well. Those hospital wastewater systems are going directly into a municipal wastewater treatment system. And so that's a really easy answer, in my opinion, to really reduce the sheer volume of pharmaceuticals in the environment, is just dealing with the facilities that produce the most, which would be hospitals, clinics, and probably elderly facilities as well. Thanks for that question. It's a great question.
Thank you. I'm going to repeat the same process again. Tanisha gave an excellent answer, and there's a lot of links that she added to this question, but again, having it on voice might just help some people who haven't been using the Q&A. If you could answer one more time, what can we do to stop the iron shredding facility from moving to the south side? Thank you.
Yeah, so on IEC's website, we have an action alert you can take, which will drive emails to your legislators urging them to stop this move to the southeast side. Also supporting local environmental justice organizations and activists are fighting this. The Southeast Environmental Task Force, Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, and Blacks and Greens are just a few organizations that are fighting this move. There's also a petition going around to send to Mayor Lori Lightfoot to stop this from happening. So I will plug into the environmental justice organizations because they're doing more on the ground work and trying to stop this from happening.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We have another question that we'd like to ask. This one is directed at Dr. Gomez. Could you elaborate on what the relationship is between illness and the environment?
You're on mute.
Right now.
Sorry about that. That's an entire talk in and of itself. But as you heard, Tanisha, a well-known one is asthma exacerbations. The ER physicians, primary care physicians are seeing this all the time. There is a new paper that just came out in July about the adverse effects on pregnancy, preterm labor, preterm infants. You probably all heard about the Zika virus, and you know that started off much further south, and by the time this became an emerging topic for all the practitioners, we were having to screen our patients who were now in the Texas area. So obviously the migration of the mosquitoes. And these are not nominal workups that women have to go through, or lifestyle changes that happen in their families. And then you have the cardiovascular effects, you know, with pollution and air quality. So many effects on our health that we should all be aware of, so that we can advocate for ourselves. I mean, as a healthcare professional, I need to advocate for you. So that's a quick summary.
Thank you so much. At this moment, we don't see any more questions, so I am going to hand the mic back to Mrs. LaPlante, but if you have any last minute, you could throw those in the question and answer.
So I just wanted to thank everyone for attending. We really hope that you will attend our next webinar on October 27th. This is going to be a roll up your sleeve. And just to send you off with some inspiring words, is absolutely, we can do this. The electrification of America has to happen in order to combat the climate crisis. It can happen. There's absolutely no question about it. It has to be a Marshall Plan kind of effort. And there are some of the brightest minds in America right now working on how you electrify the country. It can happen. And one of the things we're going to do is roll up our sleeves and talk about it at the end of October. And this will affect every single one of you on this call. In 5 years, our lives are going to look a lot different than they do now. Instead of gas stations on every curb, there's probably going to be charging stations. It's going to happen. So we do invite you to join us, and thank you again. Heidi, any last words? You're on mute. You're on mute.
I am trying to multitask way too much, and my old brain does not handle multitasking very well. We had one final question for MC that we'd like to give her a chance to answer. MC, did you see that question? Lucy, can you repeat it real quick?
Love to. How can we know the progress of replacing the lead pipes? Is there some transparency in that matter?
So this is, I think, a little bit of a complicated question. It definitely varies case to case. But I guess the short answer would be no. Like, because I don't know if you guys have heard that about they're replacing the lead pipes in some Chicago schools and in some parts of Chicago, which is amazing. But that was like a big issue 5 years ago when the Flint, Michigan crisis happened. Like that first came up, and everybody wanted the Chicago government to do something about the lead pipes in their own communities. I know Tanisha talked a little bit about that. And so it took 5 years. And so I think it's a very complicated issue. It's an issue of finance, an issue of, time. It takes a lot of time. So, I'm not an expert on lead pipes, so I don't know how much I can say about this, but I would say if you want to know the progress, if there is a lead pipe being replaced in your community, talk to your city government and see if they'll give you some transparency and work from there.
I can hop in quickly on that.
Go ahead.
Lead is one of my favorite contaminants to study, and I did research it back in college. So the city of Chicago released its lead pipe replacement plan this month, actually. As Mary was saying, it's a very expensive process to replace lead pipes to copper pipes, which are less likely to corrode, and it can take a very long time. It's for all residential homes in Chicago, also including schools and daycares. It is at no cost to low-income communities. It can cost up to $10,000 to replace lead pipes for a home, just to put that in context. In terms of progress, it's under the jurisdiction of the Chicago Department of Water, so I'm assuming you can reach out to them to see what the progress is happening. This is going to take a very long time. And focusing on the most vulnerable areas first, I believe, to make that transition. But it's really important that it happens. Again, it was an issue 5 years ago. We're finally doing something on it now, but it will take a very long time.
Well, thank you so much. I am just so excited to have been able to bring you this program, because I'm not smart enough to be able to offer this to you without the help of Liz and Regina and Seth and Tanisha and Mary Catherine and Lucy. It's just not in my wheelhouse. But what is in my wheelhouse is to offer you a chance to have all of this information in one spot at www.lwvah.org. What we have there is a public folder. It's a Google Drive. We are a nonprofit organization with a shoestring budget, all volunteers. So we use as many free platforms as we can get. And in that public folder, you will find the letter that Mary Catherine has put together. But here's what I want to tell you, is that when you write your legislators, tell them a personal story. I know through the work that I have done with the League of Women Voters over the last several years, is that when we can connect personally with our legislators, we are far more likely to get them to act than if we tell them some random faraway story. They need to hear from their constituents who vote them in. And finally, vote. In our last contested election in the Northwest suburbs, we really had only about 10% voter turnout. That was for things like school boards, our park district boards. So all of those places that are making these decisions locally about our environment, virtually nobody is showing up for those elections. So I plead with you to register to vote, to plan your ballot, and to vote, not just now in this presidential election, but through all of our elections going forward, even our primaries. Super important that we're voting in the primary. So there's my momism for the day and my little beg for the day for you to vote. Anyway, we're so grateful to you all. And if you would CC us at action, action.lwvah@gmail.com on any letters that you send, we're going to do a drawing for something really amazing. 2 free tickets to the Illinois Commission on Diversity and Human Relations next gala. So again, CC us when you write a letter at action.lwvah@gmail.com, and we are going to make sure you are at this amazing gala with the Illinois Commission on Diversity and Human Relations. So there you go. We put our money where our mouth is, and I hope that you do the same thing. Anybody else? Any last things? All right. Thank you so much. Good night for now, and go watch the debate.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.